I'm going to now turn it over to Yokiko Tomohika, who is from the anthropology department at Yale University, and she's going to help set the context. So, Yokiko.
My portion of the research is looking at some of the historical maps and photographs that are available. For today, I have just put together a very one example. As you can see on the left is an image of modern green, and then we have maps like the one on the right, which is a historical map. Comparing it by eye, you can see some similarities and things, but using the computer, well, first this is the New Haven green. The red circle is where the Lincoln Oak was located, and then I have rotated the map so it matches exactly the New Haven green. The modern orientation, I have it, and we can overlay it. It's a little bit light, but you can overlay it exactly and start to see how the historical maps compare to the modern, and this way we can start putting it in a geographical historical context. And I'll be doing this with some of the other maps that are available, as well as hopefully some historical images, and be able to look at the changing landscape of the New Haven green. So comparing just this 1748 Wadsworth map to the modern image, you can see that the blue outline is where the burial ground is shown in this map, and the red circle is where the Lincoln Oak is, or was. So it's located right on the edge of the burial ground shown in that map. So next, I'll pass it over to Judith. Judith? Do you want to talk a little bit?
I do. Can you all hear me? Great. I'm Judy Schiff. I've been considered for some years the Yale historian, and now I'm very proud that I was named a year or so back the New Haven city historian. So I'll do my best to give a very brief overview. There are so many experts here tonight. To set all of this in a historical context. Of course, we all were excited to find in the roots of the tree these bones. Many people thought it was a crime scene to begin with, or a mystery, but it turned out to be but one or maybe a few of the thousands of interments in the town burying ground that took place from the founding of New Haven in 1638 until 1797, when the Grove Street Cemetery opened. And if you think of those years in terms of modern history, a lot of things happened in that time period. They were not the sensational, quick inventions that have happened, say, in the past 100 or 150 years. But nonetheless, times changed, and changed radically in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. But for 375 years, and we've been marking it this year, the green has been the center and the heart of New Haven. It's almost unusual, perhaps unique, that a city of the size of New Haven has kept its center intact, and that businesses, churches, courts have all stayed around the original green. And so the green was the center square of the 9 squares that comprised New Haven. That was the town and even the city of New Haven when it became a city in 1784. And when the first ship of Puritans landed in New Haven on April 24th of 1638, there were some 500 men, women, and children organized in family groups who set about to form themselves into a new utopia, the New Haven colony. Very different from the kind of settling that took place in Virginia and the South, where you had mostly single men coming, looking to make quick fortunes, bond servants coming, and so forth. This had a religious purpose and mission, very, very different. They laid the town out in 9 squares, and 1 year later, they began to plan for their meeting house, and in 1640, the meeting house was constructed in the center of the center square. Nearby, they built a schoolhouse. Education was extremely important, and the schoolhouse was built right nearby, probably on the site of the present United Church. The dead were buried behind the center meeting house on what is now called the Upper Green. And of course, we realized that of these 9 squares, over time, they began divided into 2, into 4, and so there are many blocks within the 9 squares. Of course, from the beginning, people died and had to be buried. And Puritan funerals were not elaborate affairs. We tend to think of the reverence of the dead and burials the way we think of them today. But religion and burials were very separate things. And they tended to keep them very simple and stark. And sometimes funerals were not really held in the way we think of them today. Families just went quietly about and buried their dead. And there were often no religious services at all. But over time, a certain amount of sentimentality, as they thought of it, began to creep into the services. And types of rituals did begin to evolve. Death was such an everyday occurrence, and maybe that was the reason that they tended to ignore it a little bit, or to get it over with as quickly as possible. Of course, in childbirth, we heard a lecture earlier this year when a historian said that most Puritan women could expect to be pregnant almost on and off constantly for a period from the time they married, which could be as young as 15 or 16 or into their early 20s, and until their childbearing years were over. So sometimes, although many women still ended up with large families, the number of pregnancies and births might have been even double what they had. They might have had 12, 15 pregnancies. And so it was very, very common for both the babies and the mother to die in childbirth. Infancy, then from epidemics, especially in a place like New Haven, which was a seaport and a trading center. You had people bringing in diseases from many other places. And then there was the problem of contaminated food and water. Most people drank alcoholic beverages. They were afraid of the water, either cider or mead or some other form of alcoholic beer. Now, as early as 1659, when barely 100 people had been buried on the green, the governor of the New Haven colony, Henry Newman, expressed concern about the health threats of the bodies lying in these shallow graves in the middle of the town. He proposed the construction of a fence to protect the dead. But 1 year after his suggestion, nothing happened, and Newman himself passed away and was buried on the green. Life in New Haven was full of challenges in the early years. The English Civil War of the 1640s, followed by Oliver Cromwell's victory, enabled many settlers to go back to New Haven. They had come with a price on their head. They were renegades who were trying to save their property in England, and suddenly had power back again. I had my moment of glory last summer. Maybe some of you saw the TV show Who Do You Think You Are with Cindy Crawford. And Cindy is a descendant of an original settler of New Haven, Thomas Trowbridge, who came to New Haven with a family of 4 boys, a wife. The wife suddenly disappears with no death record, but probably she passed away. And he left his boys in New Haven and went back to England, presumably to find a wife, and never came back again. He was pressed into service into Oliver Cromwell's army. He led a victory and went on to great power there. So the times were very unpredictable. And then suddenly you get the restoration of Charles II in 1660. He is out to get the judges who have signed the death warrant of his father, Charles I, and a lot of blame falls in New Haven. So the New Haven colony shut down summarily by Charles II, and it is no more. New Haven is part of the Connecticut colony. In 1668, the Hopkins Grammar School was founded on the green. That was a great disappointment, actually, to the original founder, John Davenport, who had come with the hopes of setting up a college. They went first to Boston, and even when they got there in 1637, there was already a college there, which became Harvard. They came to New Haven, but Davenport's dreams were dashed when the college found that, well, for the few people who really needed college, they could go to Harvard, but what they really needed was a high school, and so Hopkins Grammar School was founded. And then in the 18th century, there were many more functional demands that came to the Green. In addition to being the meeting house, the burial ground, in 1701, some sort of an acknowledgement of the fact that New Haven had been a colony on its own, New Haven became the co-capital of Connecticut. And one of the first acts in October of that year was the granting of a charter to found Yale College. It was known simply at that time as the Collegiate School. And from that point on, the fall meeting of the Connecticut legislature was held in New Haven until 1873, when New Haven ceased to be a co-capital. So New Haven began to be a bigger and more bustling place. In 1716, the Yale Corporation voted to move Yale, which had started in Saybrook as a kind of compromise site between Hartford and New Haven, to move to New Haven. New Haven bid the most money and gave the most land to settle a college there. And it was started in a simple wooden building at the facing the southwest corner of the Green, on the corner of College and Chapel Street. And that same year, they had the first public commencement. That was in 1718, when the collegiate school name was changed to Yale. The county courthouse was built, and the next year, the first State House, separate building, was constructed up at the northwest corner of the Green. In 1750, the first permanent Yale College building, Connecticut Hall, was constructed. And that building, of course, you can still see. It's now in the center of the old campus and seems to be rather isolated. But until those Victorian buildings were built along College Street, there was a front lawn of Yale. So Connecticut Hall faced the upper Green. And I should mention also that in a couple of years, in 2016, we will be celebrating the 300th anniversary of the removal of Yale to New Haven. In the middle of the century, another church house was built called the Brick Meeting House. And it's interesting if you look at the old pictures, because we always think of all the churches facing on what became Temple Street, facing toward Church Street in the middle of the Green. But Center Church at that time ran the other way. The steeple actually went toward Elm Street, which tends to be confusing when you see some of the diagrams of the burying ground at that time. In 1763, there was a new State House built. And from that time on, the marketplace, which was the southern part of the lower part, I should say, of the Green, which faced to the east, became known finally as the Green instead of just as the marketplace.